Hi, I'm Sherry and this is Gardening in the North. So today I want to show you how I do my version of sun-dried tomatoes. Basically, I put them into my food dehydrator. I dry them for about 12 hours and then I process them into jars. Before I do that though, I do want to talk to you a little bit about eggshells. So one thing that I like to do with my eggshells is I save them. So whenever we're eating eggs, we just clean them out, leave them on the counter on a paper towel. And once they're dry, I stick them into a Ziploc bag that I have underneath my sink. And I throw them in and then I just give it a quick squeeze every time just to kind of crush them up a little bit because if I don't do that, the bag fills up pretty quick. And I throw it back under my sink. So once it gets about half full, I'll take all of the eggshells out of there, I'll throw them into my Vitamix, blend them up into a fine powder, and sprinkle them around my garden. So why do I do this? I do this because the calcium that are in the eggshells are really good for your garden. It really helps to moderate the soil to ensure that it's not too acidic. And you know, I know a lot of people will throw these into their composter and that's great too, except that the shells don't break up as easy as the rest of the food that's being placed into the composter. So we want to help it along a little bit. And so if you even wanted to blend them up and throw them into your composter, that's an idea as well. Get it mixed up with everything else. And then when you do use the compost in your garden, you're getting everything, all the nutrients and all the benefits from everything that's in there. Otherwise, you may find some eggshells being left as big pieces when you're using your compost. So just one of the tricks that I use that I wanted to share with you. So I've already made 2 small batches of my version of sun-dried tomatoes. The first batch that I did, I dried the tomatoes in my food dehydrator for about 12 to 13 hours, took them out when they were nice and crunchy, placed them into these little jars, put some spices and some olive oil, and then left them for about a week and a half. Week and a half later, I opened up the jar, I tried one, they were still kind of crunchy. I felt like there wasn't enough spice in them, so I've added some more spices into them. Just kind of doubled what I had put in there originally. And then I started thinking about, you know, how crunchy they were and, you know, certain recipes that might call for sun-dried tomatoes or certain recipes that you want to put sun-dried tomatoes in, like maybe a chicken wrap. You know, you don't necessarily want something crunchy going into there. You might want something that has the same flavor, but is a little bit softer in nature. So I decided to make a second batch. And what I did with these ones was when they were done drying in the food dehydrator, I took them out and I boiled them for 2 minutes in a mixture of water and vinegar. Pulled them out, laid them down on paper towel, dried them out, air dried them, and then placed them into the jars with the same amount of spices that I had done the first time, but I doubled it, and put in some olive oil. And so that was about a week ago. I haven't tried these yet. And I thought it would be fun if I tried them with you and you could see the expression on my face on whether or not this was a good idea or a bad idea. Pop the lid. Okay, so let's just see. So when I touch it with the fork, I can feel that they're not soggy. They still have a good texture to them. They're not crispy, obviously, but I feel like they're still somewhat solid in nature as opposed to being mush. And so I'm just going to take a small one in case I don't like it. It's pretty amazing. Okay, so now I need to try the other ones. Now that I've just tried that one, just to see. Okay, so I don't know if you can hear this. I'm gonna try not to hit the glass with my fork, but I wonder if you can hear. So they're still pretty crispy. I'm just gonna try and get one. Okay. They're pretty good too. I'm not sure which ones I like better. I think that they both are pretty amazing, and I really like them. I think that if I'm doing some kind of pasta or stir fry or something like that, I would probably use the crunchier ones. Only because for one reason, I did them a little bit smaller. And two, I think that they'll soak up whatever juice or sauces that you're using, and it will soften them up a tiny bit more. And I think they will be pretty awesome. I think if I'm doing a chicken wrap or, you know, something like homemade pizza, then I would use the soft ones, because I could throw them on top of the pizza and throw them into the oven and they would crisp up a little bit, but still keep the softness. I don't currently have anything drying in the dehydrator right now, so I'm going to use all 9 trays and dry as many of these tomatoes as I can, and then I'll make a decision depending on how many's left and how many I can pick still from the plants, and decide whether or not I'm going to do another batch of zucchini tomato salsa, or if I'm going to add them to the freezer with the other 50 cups that are waiting to be made in tomato sauce. So let's get cutting them up. All of the tomatoes that I'm going to be placing into the sun-dried tomatoes are cherry tomatoes, or a small type of tomato. So I have the Juliets here, nice red, vibrant color. I have the orange cherries. I have the chocolate cherries, which I have to say have an amazing, amazing flavor if you haven't already tried these. I have the Sweet Millions, and I have the yellow pear cherry tomatoes. So all of these will be going into it to give that vibrant color that is really nice when you're holding up the jar. I don't know if you can see that. Again, I'm going to put them onto the trays. One of the things that I've done is I've cut some parchment paper, I've placed them onto the trays. That way, if there's any liquid from the tomatoes, it stays on the parchment paper. It doesn't get onto the silicone trays that I have underneath. And so it just helps me to keep everything a little bit cleaner, and there's less tidy up for me. Once that's done, I'm going to sprinkle it with a bit of pink salt, and then I'm going to sprinkle on a bit of my homemade onion powder and put them in the dehydrator for about 12 hours. It's been a few days since I first put the tomatoes into the dehydrator. Reason being, I had some zucchini that had to be processed, so I made tomato zucchini salsa. And sometimes you just have to prioritize what you're going to be doing. So like Canadian weather, it wasn't supposed to rain today, and of course it rained all day, and in between it raining and during it raining, it was sunny. So the minute that I was able to run outside and harvest some of my tomatoes, I did that. And I just wanted to show you what happens when you leave ripe tomatoes on the vine and we get a ton of rain. So if you can see that. The tomato has actually split. And I probably picked off probably 100 of these, where I then just threw them back onto the ground so that they can decompose into the soil. Same thing happened with my orange cherries. Not as many, I probably had around 10 of these ones. It was mainly the yellow pear that we're splitting. And so I just kind of wanted to show you that, just so that you can be aware that if you have ripe tomatoes that need to be picked, get out there, make it your priority and pick them so you don't lose any. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to empty all of my trays of dried tomatoes into my bowl, and then I'm going to grab a helper who's going to help me fill all the jars with spices, tomatoes, and olive oil. My son Wesley is going to help me fill the jars. So what I'm going to get him to do is put 1 teaspoon of basil, rosemary, parsley, and oregano into each jar before we add the tomatoes. So I'm going to get you to do that. So start with this and do all of the jars and then move along, okay? And then I'm going to empty all of these. Each jar, right? Yeah, each jar. No, honey, just do this. Do all the jars. That way you don't lose track of what you've put in and what you haven't. I've lost my partner. He had an opportunity to put his skates on and get back out there on the ice, so he's gone to do that. I wanted to show you how many dehydrated tomatoes I have. 8 cups of them, plus, I'm gonna say roughly about 1.5 cups still here that I wasn't able to fit into the bowl. So basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the dehydrated tomatoes, I'm gonna place them into the jars, I'm gonna pack them in pretty tight. Once they're in pretty tight, I'm then going to add all of the spices, except for the rosemary. I only do 1 teaspoon of that. So I will add the other 3, another teaspoon on top of the tomatoes. And then I'm gonna pour in some olive oil and put the lid on and leave them for about 1.5 weeks, 2 weeks, and then they're good to go. The jars are filled. I did spices, tomatoes, spices, olive oil. The only thing left to do is I'm gonna use a spoon. I'm gonna make sure to push all the tomatoes down into the olive oil, make sure they're nice and packed, put the lids on, write the date on the jars, and then store them away for 1.5 weeks. Now I know at the beginning of this video, I did mention that there were 2 types of sun-dried tomatoes that I've done. I chose to do the crispier version for all of these. And the reason that I chose that is I do think that probably in about 3-4 weeks, I'll be able to do another batch and I will make those ones the softer ones. So I know that there's enough tomatoes out of my vines that I can still do that. So I'm just pushing them all down. Just want to make sure none of them are hanging over. Perfect. And then I'm just going to put all the lids on. 9.5 cups of dehydrated tomatoes gave me 11 half-pint jars. Thanks for sharing your time with me.